In the fall of 1993, a 63-year-old retired railroad engineer in Atlanta, Georgia, woke up in a private medical clinic with no memory of how he had gotten there. Raymond Carter remembered his name, his address, the face of his late wife, and the routine of his daily life. But something else was gone. Something he would not realize was missing until 12 years later, when a guilt-ridden neurologist knocked on his door and confessed to a crime that had been hidden in plain sight for over a decade. By then, $523,000 had vanished from Raymond's life, taken by the one person he had trusted more than anyone since his wife's death. The woman who had cared for him. The woman he had treated like family. The woman who had drugged him, orchestrated his fall, and walked away with everything he had saved over 40 years of hard labor. This is the story of Danielle Riley, a 27-year-old certified nursing assistant who lived paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment on the west side of Atlanta, juggling 2 jobs and drowning in medical debt from her late mother's cancer treatments. A woman who worked morning shifts at a nursing home and evening shifts providing in-home care for elderly clients through a small contracted agency. A woman whose kindness and work ethic were never questioned by her employers or the families she served. A woman who, by all outward appearances, was doing everything right. But beneath that surface was desperation so profound that, when opportunity presented itself in the form of an elderly man's trust, she did not hesitate to destroy it. Raymond Carter had spent his entire adult life working for the Southern Railway Company, operating freight trains across Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. He had survived 2 derailments, countless night shifts, and the physical toll of a job that wore down men twice his size. When a switching accident in 1987 left him with permanent back injuries, the company offered him an early retirement package and a settlement that totaled nearly $200,000. Combined with his pension buyout, his savings from decades of frugal living, and a small inheritance from his late wife's family, Raymond had accumulated $523,000 by 1993. It was more money than he ever thought he would see in his lifetime. Money that represented security, dignity, and the possibility of aging without fear. He kept it in certificates of deposit, savings bonds, and a lockbox at his credit union. He told almost no one about it. He lived modestly in a small brick house in the Adamsville neighborhood, drove a 12-year-old Buick, and rarely spent money on anything beyond groceries and utilities. He was careful, he was cautious, and he was deeply, unbearably lonely. His wife, Clara, had died of a stroke in 1991. They had been married for 38 years. They had no children. Raymond's siblings had long since moved out of state, and his few remaining friends from the railroad were either dead or too frail to visit. The house that had once felt warm now felt cavernous. He ate meals alone. He watched television alone. He woke up every morning and reminded himself that this was simply what life looked like now. But in September of 1993, a minor fall in his kitchen led his insurance company to authorize a temporary home health aide. The agency sent Danielle Riley. And for the first time in 2 years, Raymond did not feel alone. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Danielle Riley was born in 1966 in the Bankhead Courts housing project on Atlanta's west side. Her mother, Lorraine, worked as a hotel housekeeper. Her father left when Danielle was 4. She grew up in a neighborhood where gunshots were background noise and where survival meant learning to be invisible. But Danielle was not interested in the street life that claimed so many of her peers. She was quiet, observant, and driven by a singular goal: to escape poverty. She graduated from Frederick Douglass High School in 1984 with decent grades and enrolled in a certified nursing assistant program at a vocational school in East Point. She completed the program in 6 months and immediately began working at a nursing home in College Park. The pay was $8 an hour. It was barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but it was honest work. And Danielle believed that if she kept her head down and worked hard, she could build something better. By 1993, Danielle was 27 years old and working 2 jobs. She spent her mornings at the nursing home and her evenings providing in-home care for elderly clients through a small agency called Compassionate Care Services. She earned just over $20,000 a year before taxes. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on Hollywood Road, sharing the space with her younger brother, Terrell, who was 19 and unemployed. Terrell had been arrested twice for petty theft and was on probation. Danielle had taken him in after their mother died of lung cancer in 1992, leaving behind $17,000 in hospital bills that Danielle had no way of paying. The debt went to collections. Danielle's credit was destroyed. She began receiving threatening letters. Her landlord, a man who owned several rundown properties in the neighborhood, told her in August of 1993 that if she did not pay 3 months of back rent by the end of October, he would file for eviction. Her car, a 1985 Honda Accord, broke down twice in September. The second time, the mechanic told her the transmission was failing and the repair would cost $1,200. She did not have $1,200. She did not have $200. She had nothing. It was in this state of quiet desperation that Danielle was assigned to Raymond Carter. The agency gave her his address, a brief medical history, and instructions to provide daily visits for medication management, light housekeeping, and companionship. Danielle arrived at Raymond's house on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-September. He answered the door slowly, leaning on a cane, his back bent from years of physical labor. He was polite but reserved. He asked her to come in and showed her around the small house. The rooms were neat but sparse. There were photographs of a woman on the mantel. Raymond explained that his wife had died 2 years earlier. He said he did not need much help, but the insurance company insisted after his fall. Danielle nodded and asked him what he needed. Raymond looked at her for a long moment, as if surprised by the question. Then he said he would appreciate it if she could help him organize his medications. She agreed. And so it began. Over the next 2 months, Danielle visited Raymond every weekday afternoon. She sorted his prescriptions into weekly pill organizers. She vacuumed the carpets and washed the dishes. She drove him to the grocery store and carried the bags inside. She listened to his stories about working on the railroad, about the derailments he had survived, about the night he met Clara at a church social in 1953. Raymond had not spoken to anyone in months. He was grateful for the company. He began to look forward to Danielle's visits. He started calling her his angel. He told her she reminded him of a niece he had not seen in years. He began to trust her in ways he had not trusted anyone since Clara's death. He showed her where he kept his medications, where he kept his spare keys, where he kept his important documents. He told her about the lockbox at the credit union. He told her how much money he had saved. He said it was more than he would ever need, and that he was thinking about writing someone trustworthy into his will. Someone who would make sure the money went to a good cause. Someone like her. Danielle did not know what to say. She thanked him and told him she was honored by his trust. But later, alone in her car, she felt a knot tighten in her chest. She thought about the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. She thought about the collection agencies calling her at work. She thought about Terrell, who had started hanging around with the same crowd that had gotten him arrested before. She thought about the fact that she was 27 years old and had nothing to show for all her years of hard work. And she thought about Raymond, who had $500,000 sitting in a lockbox and no one to spend it on. The thought made her feel sick. She pushed it away. but it did not leave. Around the same time, Danielle's cousin, Dr. Marcus Hale, was facing his own financial collapse. Marcus was 34 years old and a neurologist practicing at a private clinic in Decatur. He had graduated from Meharry Medical College in 1985 and built a respectable career treating patients with traumatic brain injuries, stroke victims, and dementia cases. But in 1991, Marcus had invested nearly $200,000 in a medical imaging startup that promised to revolutionize diagnostic technology. The company went bankrupt within 18 months. Marcus lost everything. He had borrowed heavily from friends, family, and a high-interest private lender who was now demanding repayment with escalating threats. By the fall of 1993, Marcus owed nearly $250,000. He was drinking heavily. His marriage was falling apart, he was barely sleeping, and he was terrified. Danielle and Marcus had grown up in the same neighborhood. They were not close, but they saw each other occasionally at family gatherings. In late October of 1993, Danielle ran into Marcus at a relative's birthday party. She could see immediately that something was wrong. Marcus looked exhausted, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. They ended up talking alone in the kitchen while the rest of the family watched television in the living room. Danielle confessed that she was 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction. Marcus confessed that he was drowning in debt and that dangerous people were threatening him. They sat in silence for a moment, two people who had tried to do everything right and were being punished for it. Then Marcus said, half joking, that Danielle was lucky to have a client with $500,000 he did not even use. Danielle did not laugh. She stared at Marcus, and Marcus stared back. The joke hung in the air between them. And then, slowly, it stopped being a joke. Over the next 2 weeks, Danielle and Marcus spoke several times on the phone. The conversations were cautious, circling around an idea that neither of them wanted to say out loud. Marcus explained, in hypothetical terms, how memory worked. He explained how traumatic brain injuries could cause retrograde amnesia, erasing recent memories while leaving older ones intact. He explained how certain sedatives, when combined with a head injury, could worsen memory consolidation, making it nearly impossible for a patient to recall specific details from the days or weeks before the trauma. He explained how such injuries, when properly managed, could appear entirely natural to emergency room doctors and insurance investigators. He never said the words directly, but Danielle understood what he was telling her, and she understood that if Raymond forgot about the lockbox, if he forgot about the money, if he forgot that he had ever told her about it, then no one would ever know it was missing. Danielle told herself she would never go through with it. She told herself it was insane. She told herself she was not that kind of person, but every morning she woke up to the same crushing reality: the eviction notice, the collection calls, the failing car. Terrell's probation officer warning her that one more arrest would mean jail time, the suffocating weight of knowing that no matter how hard she worked, she would never escape. And every afternoon she went to Raymond's house and watched him move slowly through his quiet, empty life, surrounded by more money than he would ever spend, trusting her completely. The temptation was unbearable. And finally, on a cold evening in mid-November, Danielle made her decision. She called Marcus and told him she was ready. Marcus was silent for a long time. Then he asked her if she was sure. Danielle said yes. Marcus told her what she needed to do. He wrote a prescription for a sedative called lorazepam, which he told her to crush and mix into Raymond's evening meal. He explained that the drug would cause dizziness, disorientation, and drowsiness. He told her that if Raymond stood up too quickly or tried to walk while the drug was taking effect, he would likely fall. And if he fell and hit his head, Marcus could arrange for him to be brought to the private clinic where Marcus occasionally worked night shifts. There, under the guise of monitoring a head injury, Marcus could administer a second drug that would interfere with memory consolidation. Raymond would wake up confused but otherwise unharmed. He would remember his name, his address, his wife. But the specific details of his finances, the lockbox, the exact amount of money he had told Danielle about would be gone, buried beneath the fog of a concussion that no one would question. On the evening of November 17, 1993, Danielle arrived at Raymond's house just after 6 o'clock. She let herself in with the spare key he had given her weeks earlier. Raymond was sitting in his recliner, watching the evening news. He smiled when he saw her and asked if she was staying for dinner. Danielle said yes. She went to the kitchen and prepared his usual meal: baked chicken, green beans, and mashed potatoes. While the food was warming, she took the crushed lorazepam tablet from her purse and stirred it into the mashed potatoes. Her hands were shaking. She thought about stopping. She thought about throwing the plate away and leaving and never coming back. But she did not. She carried the plate to Raymond and set it on the TV tray beside his chair. He thanked her and began to eat. Within 15 minutes, Raymond's speech began to slur. He blinked slowly and said he felt strange. Danielle asked if he was all right. Raymond said he felt dizzy. He tried to stand, saying he needed to lie down. Danielle moved toward him as if to help, but she did not reach him in time. Raymond swayed, took one unsteady step, and collapsed forward, striking his forehead on the corner of the hallway table. The sound was sharp and sickening. Raymond lay motionless on the floor. Danielle knelt beside him, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. Raymond groaned and opened his eyes. Blood trickled from a cut above his eyebrow. He looked at Danielle, confused, and asked what had happened. Danielle told him he had fainted. She told him she was going to call for help, but she did not call 911. She called Marcus. Marcus arrived at the house 20 minutes later, driving his own car and carrying a medical bag. He examined Raymond quickly, checking his pulse, his pupils, his responsiveness. He told Raymond that he had suffered a minor fall and that he needed to be taken to a clinic for observation. Raymond, still disoriented, did not argue. Marcus and Danielle helped him into the back seat of Marcus's car. They drove to the small private clinic in Decatur where Marcus worked part-time. The clinic was nearly empty. Marcus checked Raymond in under the pretense of monitoring a possible concussion. He placed him in a private room and administered an intravenous drip containing a combination of fluids and a drug called midazolam, a benzodiazepine known to interfere with the formation of new memories. Raymond drifted in and out of consciousness. Marcus stayed with him for 3 hours, documenting everything as if it were a routine medical procedure. At 10:30 that evening, Raymond woke up. He remembered his name. He remembered his address. He remembered his wife. But when Marcus gently asked him about his finances, about his savings, about the lockbox he kept at the credit union, Raymond looked confused. He said he did not remember talking about that. He said he must have had some money saved, but he could not recall the details. Marcus made a note in the chart and told Raymond he was going to be fine. The memory loss was common after a head injury. It would likely improve with time. Raymond was discharged the following morning. Marcus drove him home and helped him inside. Danielle was waiting. She asked Raymond how he was feeling. Raymond said he was tired but otherwise all right. He thanked her for calling Marcus so quickly. He said he did not know what he would do without her. Danielle nodded and told him she was glad he was safe. She stayed for another hour, cleaning up the blood from the hallway floor and making sure Raymond was comfortable. Then she left. She drove directly to the credit union where Raymond kept his lockbox. Danielle had everything she needed. She had Raymond's account information, which he had given her weeks earlier in case of an emergency. She had a forged power of attorney document that Marcus had helped her create, complete with Raymond's signature, which Danielle had practiced tracing from a check she had borrowed from Raymond's checkbook. She had a story prepared. Raymond was recovering from a fall and had asked her to retrieve important documents from his lockbox. The teller, a young woman who had worked at the credit union for less than a year, barely looked at the paperwork. She asked for Raymond's account number and a photo ID. Danielle provided both. The teller disappeared into the back room and returned 5 minutes later with a metal lockbox. She handed it to Danielle and asked her to sign a release form. Danielle signed it. The teller smiled and wished her a good day. Danielle walked out of the credit union carrying $523,000 in savings bonds, certificates of deposit, and settlement documents. She drove to Marcus's apartment. They sat at his kitchen table and opened the lockbox. Inside were 12 certificates of deposit, each worth between $20,000 and $60,000. There were 17 savings bonds totaling $130,000. There were legal documents related to Raymond's injury settlement, including a check for $75,000 that had been written but never cashed. The total value of the contents was $523,000. Danielle and Marcus stared at the pile of paper. Neither of them spoke. Finally, Marcus said they needed to cash everything out as quickly as possible. He said he knew a financial broker in Marietta who specialized in handling settlements and estate liquidations, someone who would not ask too many questions. They drove to Marietta the following day. The broker, a man named Lawrence Simmons who operated out of a small office above a pawn shop, examined the documents and agreed to handle the liquidation for a 15% fee. Within a week, the bonds and certificates were converted to cash. Marcus and Danielle split the money evenly. Each of them walked away with $222,000 after fees. Danielle quit her job at Compassionate Care Services the following week. She told the agency she had accepted a full-time position at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. No one questioned her. She packed her belongings, loaded them into her repaired Honda, and left Atlanta. She did not say goodbye to Raymond. She simply disappeared. Terrell came with her, confused but grateful. They rented a small apartment in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood of Charlotte. Danielle paid off the medical debt. She bought a used car. She sent money to her landlord in Atlanta to cover the back rent and break the lease. She opened a savings account and deposited $150,000 under her name. She used the remaining money to start a small cleaning business, hiring herself out to offices and apartment complexes. She told everyone she met that she had saved for years to start her own company. She worked hard, she paid her taxes, she lived modestly, and she tried every single day to convince herself that what she had done was justified. Marcus used his share of the money to pay off the private lender who had been threatening him. He paid off his credit card debts. He made a payment on his mortgage, but he did not stop drinking. He did not repair his marriage, and he did not escape the crushing weight of what he had done. He continued working at the clinic, but his focus deteriorated. He made mistakes. He snapped at colleagues. He stopped sleeping. In 1995, his wife filed for divorce. In 1997, patient filed a complaint against him for misdiagnosing a stroke. The complaint triggered an investigation by the Georgia Composite Medical Board. Marcus was placed on probation. His reputation, already fragile, collapsed. He moved into a small apartment in East Point and began drinking every night. He thought about Danielle constantly. He thought about Raymond. He thought about the money. and he thought about the fact that he had destroyed a man's life for a debt that had already consumed him. Raymond Carter, meanwhile, resumed his quiet life in Adamsville. He was confused by the gaps in his memory. He knew something was wrong. He felt as though he had lost something important, but he could not remember what. He went to his credit union in early December of 1993 and asked to check his lockbox. The teller told him it had been retrieved 3 weeks earlier by a woman with power of attorney. Raymond said there must be some mistake. The teller showed him the release form. Raymond stared at the signature. It looked like his handwriting, but he had no memory of signing it. He asked who the woman was. The teller checked the records and said her name was Danielle Riley. Raymond felt a cold wave of dread wash over him. He asked what had been in the box. The teller said she did not have access to that information. Raymond left the credit union and drove home. He sat in his living room for hours, trying to remember. But the memory would not come. He called the credit union the next day and asked to speak to a manager. The manager explained that the transaction had been legitimate and properly documented. Raymond asked if there was any way to recover the contents. The manager said no. If the lockbox had been emptied by someone with power of attorney, there was nothing the credit union could do. Raymond hung up the phone. He did not call the police. He did not hire a lawyer. He did not know what had been taken. He only knew that something was missing, and so he let it go. For the next 12 years, Raymond lived with the nagging sense that he had been robbed, but he had no proof. He had no memory. And eventually, he convinced himself that he must have moved the money himself and simply forgotten where. He withdrew into himself. He stopped going to church. He stopped calling his siblings. He spent his days watching television and walking slowly through his empty house, a ghost in his own life. Danielle, in Charlotte, built a life that looked normal from the outside. Her cleaning business grew. She hired 3 employees. She bought a small house in the Belmont neighborhood in 2001. She attended church every Sunday. She volunteered at a local food bank. She sent Terrell to trade school. She dated occasionally, but never seriously. And every single night she lay awake thinking about Raymond. She thought about the way he had trusted her. She thought about the way he had called her his angel. She thought about the life she had stolen from him. The guilt was a weight she could not escape. She tried to convince herself that he would have died before spending the money anyway. She tried to convince herself that she had been desperate and that desperation justified anything. But she knew the truth. She had destroyed a man who had done nothing but show her kindness, and no amount of charity work or modest living could undo that. Marcus spiraled further. By 2003, he was working part-time at a walk-in clinic in College Park, making barely enough to cover his rent. His medical license was under review again after a second complaint. He was drinking every day. He was suicidal. He had tried several times to reach out to Danielle, but she never returned his calls. He was alone with his guilt, and it was killing him. In early 2005, Marcus received a notice from the Georgia Composite Medical Board informing him that his license was being suspended pending a final review. He knew it was over. He knew he would never practice medicine again, and he knew that the only thing keeping him alive was the hope that someday, somehow, he could make things right. On a cold evening in March of 2005, Marcus drove from College Park to Adamsville. He had not been to Raymond's neighborhood in over a decade. He parked on the street outside the small brick house and sat in his car for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to knock on the door. Finally, he got out and walked to the porch. He rang the doorbell. Raymond answered. He was 75 years old now, thinner and more fragile than Marcus remembered. Raymond stared at Marcus for a long moment, confusion flickering in his eyes. Then, slowly, recognition dawned. He said Marcus's name. Marcus nodded. Raymond asked what he was doing there. Marcus said he needed to talk. Raymond hesitated, then stepped aside and let him in. They sat in the living room, the same room where Marcus had examined Raymond 12 years earlier. Marcus did not waste time. He told Raymond everything. He told him about the sedative. He told him about the fall. He told him about the drugs he had administered at the clinic. He told him about the forged power of attorney. He told him about the lockbox and the money, and the way they had split it. He told him about Danielle's desperation and his own crushing debt. He told him that they had stolen $523,000 and that Raymond had never known because Marcus had erased his memory of it. Marcus spoke for nearly 30 minutes. Raymond sat in silence, his face pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. When Marcus finished, Raymond did not move. He did not speak. He simply stared at the floor. Finally, he looked up at Marcus and asked why. Marcus said he did not know. He said he had been desperate and terrified and that he had convinced himself it was the only way. He said there was no excuse. Raymond asked where Danielle was. Marcus said she was in Charlotte. Raymond asked if she knew Marcus was here. Marcus said no. Raymond nodded slowly. Then he said he wanted Marcus to leave. Marcus stood and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back and said he was sorry. Raymond did not respond. Marcus drove back to College Park and sat in his apartment, waiting for the police to arrive. But they did not come that night, or the next. It took Raymond 3 days to make the decision. On the 4th day, he called a law firm in downtown Atlanta and asked to speak to an attorney who specialized in elder financial exploitation. The attorney, a woman named Patricia Hollis, listened to Raymond's story and told him that Georgia law allowed victims of financial exploitation to pursue civil action, even if the statute of limitations for criminal charges had expired. She told him that if Marcus's confession could be corroborated, Raymond had a strong case. Raymond hired her. Patricia immediately contacted the Atlanta Police Department and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Detectives interviewed Marcus, who confessed again on the record. They subpoenaed records from the credit union, the private clinic, and the financial broker in Marietta. The records confirmed everything Marcus had said: the forged signature, the lockbox withdrawal, the liquidation of the bonds and certificates, everything. Detectives traveled to Charlotte and arrested Danielle at her home on a Tuesday morning in late April of 2005. She did not resist. She did not deny anything. She sat in the interrogation room at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and told them the entire story. She said she had been desperate. She said she had been terrified of losing everything. She said she had convinced herself that Raymond would never miss the money. But she also said she had been wrong. She said she had spent the last 12 years living with guilt so overwhelming that there were nights she wished she had never taken the money at all. The detectives asked her where the money was. Danielle said she had spent some of it on debts and her business, but most of it was still in her savings account. She agreed to cooperate fully. Raymond filed a civil lawsuit against both Danielle and Marcus in June of 2005. The case was settled out of court 4 months later. Danielle agreed to repay the full amount of $523,000 plus 12 years of compounded interest, bringing the total to $911,000. She liquidated her savings account, sold her house, and sold her cleaning business. She paid Raymond $640,000 immediately. The remaining balance was structured as a payment plan over 10 years. Marcus, who had no assets, agreed to surrender any future earnings above a basic living wage until his portion of the debt was satisfied. The Georgia Composite Medical Board permanently revoked Marcus's medical license in December of 2005. He entered a court-ordered rehabilitation program for alcohol addiction, and began working as a medical transcriptionist, earning $18 an hour. Danielle moved into a small apartment in East Charlotte. She returned to work as a certified nursing assistant, taking shifts at nursing homes and hospitals. She volunteered weekly at a senior advocacy clinic, providing free assistance to elderly patients navigating Medicare and social services. She did not speak publicly about what she had done. She simply worked, quietly, trying to repay a debt she knew could never truly be repaid. Raymond used the recovered money to hire a full-time caregiver. He rebuilt his savings. He established a scholarship fund in his late wife's name, providing tuition assistance to nursing students at Atlanta Metropolitan State College. He never spoke to Danielle or Marcus again. When asked by reporters if he had forgiven them, Raymond said he did not know. He said forgiveness was complicated. He said what they had done was unforgivable, but that he understood desperation could make people do terrible things. He said he hoped they would spend the rest of their lives trying to be better than they had been, and he said he hoped no one else would ever have to experience what he had experienced. The case drew significant media attention in Georgia and North Carolina. Advocacy groups used Raymond's story to push for stronger protections against elder financial exploitation. Several states, including Georgia, passed legislation increasing penalties for caregivers who defraud vulnerable clients. The case became a cautionary tale in nursing programs and medical ethics courses across the country. And in the quiet neighborhoods of Atlanta and Charlotte, people who had once trusted their caregivers began to ask questions they had never thought to ask before. Raymond Carter died in 2019 at the age of 89. He spent his final years in a care facility in Decatur, surrounded by staff who treated him with the kindness he had once believed was universal. His estate, including the scholarship fund, was left to a local nonprofit that provides legal assistance to elderly victims of financial abuse. Danielle Riley completed her final payment to Raymond's estate in 2015. She continues to work as a nursing assistant in Charlotte. Marcus Hale completed his rehabilitation program and continues working as a medical transcriptionist in Atlanta. Neither of them has spoken publicly about the case since 2005. The story of Danielle Riley and Raymond Carter is a reminder that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. It is a reminder that desperation can drive good people to do terrible things. And it is a reminder that the consequences of those actions, no matter how much time passes, will eventually come to light. Raymond Carter trusted Danielle Riley because he believed she was good, and perhaps in another life she would have been. But desperation has a way of revealing who we truly are when everything is on the line. And in that moment, Danielle chose to take what was not hers. She chose to destroy the trust of a man who had treated her like family, and she spent the rest of her life trying and failing to make it right.